Wisconsin, June 1944. The truck rolled past a weathered mailbox that read, Schmidt's Family Farm, EST, 1872. Hans Mueller pressed his face against the wire mesh, reading it again. And again, his breath fogged the metal. The propaganda had been absolute. Americans hated Germans, had abandoned their heritage, were mongrel enemies without shared history. But here was a Schmidt farm in Wisconsin. And by evening, these German prisoners would discover that half the farms in this county bore names identical to their own. Before we continue, if you're finding value in these untold stories of World War II, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. Your support helps us bring these forgotten moments of history back to light. The truck passed another mailbox. Mueller, then Hoffman, then Fischer. Each name hit like a physical blow. Hans turned to the man beside him, Werner Koch from Munich, and whispered in German, "These are our names." Werner's expression showed the same confusion, the same fracturing of everything they'd been taught. The guard at the front didn't understand their language, didn't see the shock spreading through the prisoners like electricity. And in that moment, Hans realized something that would reshape his entire understanding of the war. Germany hadn't just lost militarily, it had lost ideologically. Because the enemy spoke his grandfather's language and remembered songs his mother had sung. Camp McCoy sat in rolling farmland that looked more Bavarian than American. Gentle hills, forests of pine and birch, lakes that reflected skies so perfectly they seemed like portals to another world. The landscape violated everything Hans had been taught about America, that it was industrial, ugly, culturally barren. This looked like home, felt like home, which made it more dangerous than any battlefield because it suggested the propaganda had been fundamentally wrong. Hans had arrived in May, part of a group of Afrika Korps prisoners captured in Tunisia, shipped across the Atlantic, processed through East Coast facilities, then sent to Wisconsin because dairy farmers needed labor and German prisoners needed somewhere to wait out the war's inevitable end. The journey had been long, uncomfortable, but not cruel. American guards had been professional, even courteous. That, too, contradicted propaganda. Where were the barbaric, undisciplined soldiers they'd been promised? The barracks were clean, the food adequate, medical care available. Hans had expected prison camp to mean deprivation, cruelty, the kind of treatment he'd heard rumors about in German camps. Instead, it meant boredom, uncertainty, and a nagging sense that something fundamental in his worldview was cracking. The other prisoners felt it too. Conversations in the barracks circled the same questions. Why did American farms have German names? Why did guards treat them like human beings? Why did everything contradict what they'd been taught? 3 days after arrival, the first work detail was announced. 20 prisoners, 2 guards. Heading to local farms that needed help with spring planting, Hans volunteered immediately, partly from boredom, mostly from desperate curiosity about those German names on American mailboxes. He needed to understand, needed to reconcile what he was seeing with what he'd been taught. Because if the propaganda lied about this, what else had been lies? The truck passed farm after farm, Snyder Dairy, the Wagner Place, each mailbox another small shock. Each German surname, another crack in the ideological foundation. Werner sat beside him, former farmer from Munich, someone who understood agriculture at a bone-deep level. "Look at the prosperity," Werner whispered. "These farms are larger, better maintained than anything in Bavaria. How is that possible if America is weak and failing?" Hans had no answer. The truck pulled into a long driveway, passing under an archway. Hoffman Farm since 1881. The farmhouse was large, well-maintained, painted white with green shutters. The barn was enormous, built from stone and timber that suggested permanence. An older man emerged as the truck stopped. Maybe 60, weathered face, wearing overalls and a straw hat. He looked exactly like propaganda images of simple American farmers, except his name was Friedrich Hoffmann. And when he greeted the guards, his English carried an unmistakable German accent. The prisoners descended, forming a loose line. Hoffmann looked them over with an expression mixing assessment with something else. Sadness, maybe, or recognition of shared tragedy. One guard, a young man named Thompson, addressed Hoffmann in English about the work detail. Hoffmann nodded, then shocked everyone by speaking directly to the prisoners in perfect German. Guten Tag, mein Herren. Welcome to my farm. I'll treat you fairly, feed you well. If you work hard, we'll get along fine. The words hung in the air. German, not broken German, not heavily accented, but proper German with a Bavarian dialect that several prisoners recognized instantly. Hans found his voice first. You speak German, sir. The question sounded stupid even as he asked it. Hoffmann smiled slightly. Of course, it's my first language. Grew up speaking it at home, in church, at school. Didn't learn proper English until I was nearly 20. But you're American, Hans said, struggling with the contradiction. I'm both, Hoffmann replied simply. Born in Wisconsin, but my parents came from Bavaria in 1879. They brought their language, customs, way of farming. I was raised German in America. I see no contradiction in that. Werner spoke up, voice carrying genuine confusion. But we're at war. Germany and America. How can you speak our language, claim our heritage, and fight against your own people? Hoffmann's expression hardened. Germany isn't my people anymore. My people are Americans' German, Irish, Polish names, all united by choice, not blood. We left Germany for something better. Freedom, opportunity, land we could own. And when Germany started this war, started conquering and committing atrocities, we stood with America without hesitation. This is our home now. Germany is only where our grandparents came from. The words struck Hans harder than any defeat. He had never imagined German immigrants might reject the old country, might choose America deliberately, might see Germany as far less noble than propaganda claimed. His understanding of the world cracked open in a Wisconsin farmyard under a sun indistinguishable from Bavaria's. They spent the day repairing the northern fence line, pulling posts, digging holes, stretching wire. Hoffmann worked beside them, his 60-year-old body steady and practiced, speaking German and treating them like workers, not prisoners. Around noon, a bell rang from the farmhouse. Lunch, Hoffmann announced. Come up to the house. My wife's been cooking all morning. They walked up uncertain what to expect. The farmhouse was beautiful up close, well-maintained flower gardens. A porch wrapping around 3 sides. Mrs. Hoffmann met them at the door, late 50s, gray-haired, kind eyes, flower on her apron. She spoke in German with the same Bavarian accent. Come in, come in. I've made lunch for everyone. The dining room was dominated by a massive oak table that could seat 20. They crowded around it, prisoners and guards mixing together. Mrs. Hoffmann brought out food that made Hans's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Bratwurst. Real bratwurst with sauerkraut and potato salad. Rye bread, dark and dense, sliced thick with real butter. Kartoffelsalat made exactly how his mother made it in Hamburg. This wasn't American food. This was German food. Prepared in German style, served in an American farmhouse by people who claimed both identities without contradiction. Werner took a bite, closed his eyes, let out a sound halfway between laugh and sob. This tastes like home. Exactly like home. Mrs. Hoffmann smiled. My mother's recipe. She brought it from Bavaria in 1879. Taught it to me when I was a girl. I've made bratwurst every Saturday for 40 years. Why would I stop just because the world went mad? Hans ate slowly, tasting childhood in every bite, remembering Saturday dinners in Hamburg when his family was still intact, when the world made sense. when food carried no political meaning beyond simple nourishment and cultural continuity. After lunch, they returned to work, but something had shifted. The prisoners talked more freely, asking questions about Hoffman's life, how German immigrants had built Wisconsin's dairy industry into something rivaling anything in Europe. "My father used to say," Hoffman explained while digging post holes, "that Germans make excellent Americans because we understand hard work, value education, respect craftsmanship. But America made us better. Germans because it removed the aristocracy and militarism and gave us freedom to succeed based on merit rather than birth." Hans wanted to defend Germany, but sitting in the farmyard with Hoffman, he couldn't. Here, German heritage thrived without authoritarianism or conquest, exposing every lie he'd believed. On Sunday, Hoffman asked the camp commander if prisoners could attend the local German-language Lutheran service. The commander agreed, curious how German soldiers and German-American civilians might react. 15 prisoners rode into New Holstein, a town built by German immigrants. The small stone church smelled of old wood and hymnals. 70 congregants' farm families, some descended from immigrants older than the state itself, studied the prisoners with curiosity, sympathy, even sadness. Reverend Weber preached in German about division and reconciliation, insisting one could be American and still honor German heritage. After the service, people offered comfort and cookies. Mrs. Schneider, whose son fought in France, told Hans, "God is bigger than war." Over the following weeks, each farm assignment revealed the same truth. German culture flourished, here free, democratic, and thriving. "Can I ask you something?" Hans said in German. "Something that's been troubling me." "Of course. How do you reconcile it? Being German and American simultaneously. Fighting against the country your family came from." Hoffman was quiet for a long moment, organizing thoughts. "My grandfather left Bavaria in 1879 because he was third son of a landless farmer. He had no future, no land inheritance, no opportunity. So he came to America, homesteaded 160 acres, built this farm from wilderness. He gestured at the prosperous landscape. In 2 generations, we went from tenant farmers to owners of 480 acres. My sons will inherit something worth passing along. That's impossible in the old German system where aristocracy owned land and everyone else was perpetual renter. But don't you feel loyalty to Germany? I feel loyalty to the idea of Germany, to German culture, language, craftsmanship, values. But the regime that controls Germany, now, that's not Germany. That's a perversion of everything good about German heritage. The regime took German discipline and turned it to cruelty. Took German pride and turned it to conquest." He paused, unable or unwilling to complete the thought. Hans knew what he meant. Even prisoners received filtered news about what was being discovered as Allied forces advanced. The camps, the systematic persecution, the industrial-scale horror. "I fight against the regime," Hoffman continued, "because I love what Germany could be. A nation of free people respecting individual rights, contributing to human progress. But to become that, the current system must be destroyed utterly." "And after the war?" Hans asked. "Hopefully Germans will remember what your ancestors knew before the regime poisoned everything. That freedom matters more than national glory. That prosperity comes from opportunity rather than conquest." Hoffman looked directly at Hans. "You're young. You'll survive this war. When you go home, you'll help rebuild. Remember what you've seen here. Remember that Germans succeeded wildly in America because American system allowed it. Build that system in Germany." As summer turned to fall, prisoners were allowed to write letters home. Brief, censored messages that hopefully would reach families through chaos of war's end. Hans wrote to his mother in Hamburg, assuming she was still alive, hoping the letter would somehow find her. "Dear Mother, I am well and treated fairly. The camp is in Wisconsin, a place full of Germans who are also Americans. I work on a farm owned by a man named Hoffman, whose family came from Bavaria in 1879. He speaks German like grandfather spoke it. Cooks food like you cooked it. Maintains traditions we thought were uniquely German. I have learned something important here. We were lied to about America. They are not weak or mongrel or doomed. They are Germans and Irish and Poles who chose freedom over autocracy, who built prosperous lives through hard work. The farmer who employs me is more German in meaningful ways than many people I knew in Hamburg. When I come home, I will carry these lessons with me. Germany can rebuild, but we must build something different. Your son, Hans. He folded the letter carefully, gave it to camp censors, hoped it would reach Hamburg and convince his mother that not everything was lost. That her son had learned things that might help rebuild what had been destroyed. October brought harvest, corn to be picked, soybeans combined, hay stored for winter. German prisoners became integral to Wisconsin's agricultural operations. Hans had become skilled at operating farm equipment under Hoffman's instruction, could drive tractors, operate hay balers, perform maintenance on machinery more advanced than anything in Germany. The work was satisfying in ways military service never had been. Productive rather than destructive. Building abundance rather than creating scarcity. During a break from corn picking, sitting in shade of a massive oak, Hoffman shared more family history. He'd brought out a photo album, old pictures showing his parents' arrival in America. The original farmhouse, barely larger than a shed. Gradual expansion over decades that turned wilderness into prosperity. "This is my father in 1895, Hoffman said, pointing to a young man beside a newly built barn, 23 years old. Been in America 16 years. On his way to becoming one of the region's most successful dairy farmers. Not through conquest or inheritance, but through hard work and smart decisions." He turned the page, same barn 60 years later. Expanded twice, still standing, still functional. That's the difference, Hans. In Germany, barns belonged to aristocracy, maintained through tenant labor. Here, my father owned his barn, maintained it with pride, knew it would pass to his children. Ownership changes everything. Hans studied the photographs. Seeing a narrative of German success in America, heritage maintained while building something entirely new. The propaganda had insisted this was impossible, that German purity required German soil, that immigrants were traitors who diluted their heritage. But evidence contradicted propaganda absolutely. Winter transformed Wisconsin into something that looked exactly like German countryside in propaganda images. Snow-covered hills, frozen lakes, forests dressed in white. But the similarity was superficial. This was free land owned by people who'd chosen to be here. Developed through opportunity rather than aristocratic permission. Farm work slowed, but didn't stop. Cows needed milking twice daily. Equipment required maintenance. Friedrich's sons came home for Christmas. 3. Americans in uniform who still spoke fluent German, but identified fully as American. Hans, Werner, and 2 other POWs were invited to dinner. Guards sat distantly, more symbolic than restrictive. Walter, the eldest son, and an army captain addressed them. "I know this is strange eating with men who may fight your brothers. But understand, we're not fighting the German people. We're fighting a regime that twisted German heritage into cruelty and conquest. When Germany falls, Germans are being freed, not conquered." Hans wanted to protest, but the warmth of the farmhouse and German Christmas dishes cooked by Americans revealed how hollow the propaganda had been. Walter continued, "My grandfather left Bavaria seeking freedom. He built a life here. That's not betrayal, it's the best of German values. When you rebuild Germany, build freedom. The rest will follow." By spring 1945, news of Germany's collapse brought relief, grief, and fear. Hans sat on the porch, wondering if anything of Hamburg or his mother survived. Friedrich joined him. "Germany's defeated," Hans said. Everything's gone. Not your culture. Friedrich replied, its future depends on what you rebuild. Bitterness will poison it. Honesty and freedom can redeem it just as German Americans did. Germany surrendered in May. The war in Europe was over, and prisoners would soon be repatriated. Hans and Werner were scheduled for August. On Hans's last day at the farm, Friedrich handed him a brown paper package. "Open this on the ship," he said. "It's what you'll need to help rebuild Germany." Hans thanked him for treating the posts like people, for showing them that propaganda had lied. Friedrich waved it off. "You worked hard. Write to me when you're settled. I want to hear how Germany rebuilds." Atlantic Ocean, August 1945. Hans sat on the deck among prisoners heading home to ruins and uncertainty. He opened the package. Inside, a Hoffman family photo album, proof that German heritage could thrive in freedom. Notes on Wisconsin dairy farming practical guidance for reconstruction. A German-English dictionary with handwritten margins. Letters of introduction to German-American groups helping rebuild Germany. And a final letter. Friedrich wrote that Germany's task was not only rebuilding cities, but rebuilding character. German heritage, he said, had never required authoritarianism. Freedom had allowed German Americans to prosper. Hans must help Germany choose democracy and resist any return to control. "You aren't responsible for the regime's crimes," Friedrich wrote, "but you are responsible for what Germany becomes next." Hans read the letter repeatedly. Realizing why propaganda had insisted Americans had no culture, because German success and American freedom shattered its foundations. Werner approached. "What's in the package?" "Hope," Hans said. "Proof we don't have to repeat the past." The ship cut through gray water toward a broken homeland. Hans held the letter to his chest, knowing rebuilding Germany meant choosing freedom over fear and proving heritage thrived best without chains.